in New Jersey, we have a fully inclusive employment non-discrimination law that protects against discrimination on the basis of gender identity as well as sexual orientation. And many companies, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Prudential, prohibit employment discrimination, and they find it's really to their benefit. It's a matter of corporate competitiveness. It's good for their companies as well as good for the economy, not to mention the right thing to do. Some people still haven't caught on to these benefits yet, and I hear from constituents who say the proposed legislation here would grant special consideration on the basis of sexual orientation. Professor Eskridge, could you quickly address that? Does this grant special consideration?
Representative Holt, the answer to that is no. For example, this bill would prevent a gay bookstore, for example, from discriminating against a possible employee because she or he is straight. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, and I assume that the supporters of the bill are fully comfortable with that. Now, here's what's going on, though, with the rhetoric of special rights. Whenever a minority group, particularly one that's been despised, is elevated to a position of equality, there is a tendency, and this is not a question of dishonesty or whatnot, it's just a tendency for the mainstream to see that they're getting special rights. We saw this at the U.S. Supreme Court level in Romer versus Evans, which struck down the Colorado Amendment 2 that had been adopted in 1992. The majority by Justice Kennedy said that what Amendment 2 would take away from gay people in terms of non-discrimination rights is assumed by everybody else as just a matter of course. The dissent by Justice Scalia argued that this was special legislation and special rights that gay people were seeking, and all Amendment 2 was doing was to revoke those special rights.
Thank you. Mr. Sears, just to underscore the point that we're not talking about a few or even many legal cases, we're talking about systemic problems here that to be addressed. Can you say anything about the effects on employment rates or unemployment rates and salaries for, let's say, transgendered individuals?
Yes, let me start by saying that there are, our institute does a lot of analysis of data, and there are so few government surveys and other large surveys that ask questions about transgender status that we are really hampered in our ability to do a lot of analysis. There have been two really tremendous surveys, the largest of their kind done this year, one by the Transgender Law Center in California, the other by the National Center for Transgender Equality and the task force here in D.C., which have large samples. They have samples that include public employees, and they show high rates of discrimination. But what they also show are alarming rates, unbelievable rates of unemployment and poverty. And I think if you look at those large surveys plus probably 20 to 30 smaller community-based surveys that have been done, that has been consistent throughout for the transgender community. That while a lot of LGB people get fired from positions, the problem with gender identity is getting through the door. And if you don't get through the door, you don't have an income and you don't have a job.
If you could be sure to provide for us any references about those studies. And then real quickly, as you've looked at these things, have you found many examples of heterosexuals discriminated against because of perceptions of homosexuality?
Yes, our examples do include heterosexuals. They come to the cases in three ways. The first would be on the basis of perceived to be gay. There's a case in the examples of two guys in Illinois who work for the Department of Health. They go on the fishing trip. One's married. One is gay. The married one comes back to the office and is pestered constantly about whether or not he is gay. There are horrific facts dealing with sexual harassment. It's taken before court, and he loses because it's considered not actionable under Title VII. The second is association claims. There's a case I couldn't believe in Tennessee where a superintendent was asked to speak at a convention held by a church where predominantly the members were gay, lesbian, and bisexual and transgender. He didn't know that. He accepted the invitation. He then couldn't attend, but it was reported in a newspaper that he did speak there. There were many complaints made to his school board. He addressed that by writing 2 different articles to the paper correcting the inaccuracies, and he was terminated, or he was not hired again nonetheless. And he won his case in a circuit court, and his argument was, I personally don't even endorse homosexuality, but I have a constitutional right to associate with whoever I want, including LGBT people. The third type of case are retaliation cases, and there was a witness at an end of hearing a few years ago who hired a lesbian at a radiology department in Washington. That lesbian became harassed. She made complaints to protect her employee to the hospital. The lesbian employee was terminated, as well as his supervisor, and Nan Miguel spoke here a few years ago about her experience. So perception, association, and retaliation claims are mainly how people come to the
Gentleman's time has expired.